Coming up on our newscast tonight. South Korea's team of officials and railway experts return home after completing a 6-day joint inspection on the rail line along North Korea's western region. They report nothing much has changed since 2007. A separate team from Seoul will cross the border on Saturday to survey the northeastern railway. Anticipation is building up regarding when North Korean leader Kim Jong-un would visit Seoul or if the visit would ever take place anytime soon. South Korea's Unification Ministry as well as the nation's intel agencies say nothing has been decided on that matter. The Talian 2A made contact with a ground station in Australia some half an hour after blasting off from a space center in French Guiana. The first indigenous South Korean geostationary satellite is designed to help enhance the nation's weather monitoring system. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Cha. A group of South Korean officials and researchers wrapped up their part of the inter-Korean joint inspections and returned home today after checking North Korea's western Pyeongyang rail line for the first time since 2007. The officials noticed not much deterioration, but they did add there needs to be more analysis. Woo Jung-hee has our top story.
South Korean researchers returned home Wednesday after 6 days with officials from Pyeongyang inspecting North Korea's western Pyeongyang rail line.
The North Korean side was very cooperative in this round of inspections. We only had 6 days, but we did our best to make it a substantial survey.
Since last Friday, about 30 inspectors each from Seoul and Pyeongyang moved together along almost 400 kilometers of North Korean train tracks from the border town of Kaesong up to the northernmost city of Sinuiju. To do that, they linked up 6 train cars from South Korea with 5 from the north. The researchers concentrated mainly on the roadbeds, tunnels, bridges, and the rail operation system. This was the second time researchers from the south have surveyed the North's Western Railway, the first time being 11 years ago.
The tracks have not gotten better or worse since we checked them last time. It seems the climate didn't have much impact.
The team says North Korean trains can move at a speed of only 20 to 60 kilometers an hour and a bit faster on the tracks north of Pyeongyang. When asked whether it'll be possible to renovate the tracks or whether they'll need to be replaced, the team explained,
"We need to get the experts together for a discussion. Some researchers say we can use the tracks and others say we can't. I think we'll come to a conclusion if we do another survey or a more detailed one."
For now, it's only the inspectors who've come back to Seoul. The South Korean train cars used for the on-ground survey will now be sent to North Korea's eastern city of Wonsan. From there, another round of inspections will begin this Saturday, this time on the eastern Donghae rail line, and a different group of researchers from Seoul will cross the border for that. The overall joint survey is to end on December 17th. Woo Jung-hee, Arirang News.
There's been growing speculation that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un might visit Seoul within this month. According to the South Korean government, nothing has been decided and all options remain open. Kim Min-ji has the latest.
A visit by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to Seoul by the end of this month is still very possible, but the South Korean government says there has been no discussions about it with North Korea. Speaking Wednesday at a meeting of the National Assembly Special Committee on Inter-Korean Affairs, Seoul's Unification Minister Cho Myung-gyun said there's a chance it could happen before the end of the year, or it could be adjusted depending on the situation, adding that all options are open. Speculation about a visit has been growing since President Moon Jae-in's summit with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in Argentina last week. After the talks, Moon said the two agreed that Kim coming to Seoul would play a positive role in the North Korea-U.S. nuclear dialogue. A visit was also agreed to in the Pyeongyang Declaration reached between the two Koreas in September. There have been several dates circulating, but some have also expressed their doubts, given the lack of time to prepare, and a memorial service on December 17th marking the anniversary of the death of Kim's father, as well as the work that needs to be done on Kim's New Year's address. South Korea's intel agency also made similar remarks about the trip, saying nothing has been decided. In a separate closed-door meeting at Parliament, the National Intelligence Service explained that the matter is linked to the talks between Pyongyang and Washington, so it also depends on the progress there. Also, contrary to a media report, the agency said there was no meeting in Panmunjom on Monday between the head of the CIA's Korea Mission Center, Andrew Kim, and the North's point man on U.S. talks, Kim Jong-un. The NIS said there were no plans for the two to meet in the first place, adding that they are closely communicating with the CIA about which North Korean officials they are meeting and about Washington's stance. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Seoul's government is lifting previously imposed access restrictions to vast areas of the country, though these parts were once designated as protection zones fenced off for military purposes. The Defense Ministry assures the decision was made after careful consideration so as to not affect South Korea's combat readiness. Park Ji-won has the full story.
Seoul's Ministry of National Defense has announced that it's lifting restrictions on nearly 340 million square meters of land in the country. That's equivalent to almost 120 times the size of Yeouido, Seoul's financial district. The zones are mostly located within 25 kilometers of the military demarcation line, which divides South and North Korea. The areas were previously designated as protection zones for military purposes. Some of the areas that had restrictions lifted are now located near the border, but are zones near major military facilities across the country. The ministry says the move was carefully thought out beforehand and will not affect South Korea's military combat readiness or its defense posture. With the decision, about 8.4% of the country's administrative land remains designated as restricted or controlled area for military purposes. Before the ministry's move, the figure was about 8.8%. The South Korean government approved the Protection of Military Bases and Installations Act in 1972 to facilitate military operations and has since revised the scope of areas designated as restricted or controlled. The Defense Ministry also says it will make access procedures simpler for those who enter regions beyond the civilian control line, which is 10 kilometers from the military demarcation line. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
South Korea's defense chief stressed the importance of a strong national defense in achieving peace and the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Chung Kyung-do made the remarks in an address to a year-end conference Wednesday morning, attended by about 140 commanders and senior officials from each branch of the military and from the Defense Ministry, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Park Han-gi. The minister said that despite the ongoing efforts to ease tensions between Seoul and Pyongyang, the military has to maintain a firm defense posture and combat readiness while fully implementing inter-Korean military agreements. He added that the government's two main pillars of security strategy are a strong national defense and peace. U.S. President Donald Trump believes his second meeting with his North Korean counterpart would be, quote, productive, according to his national security advisor. The comments come after the commander-in-chief mentioned the summit would be held early next year. Cha Sang-mi help us read between the lines.
U.S. President Donald Trump believes he needs a second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un early next year, even though the regime has failed to follow through with pledges to denuclearize. This is according to U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton on Tuesday, speaking at the Wall Street Journal's annual CEO Council conference in Washington. Bolton said, quote, they have not lived up to the commitment so far, and that's why he thinks the president sees another summit as likely to be productive. By commitment, he's referring to a promise, namely the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula that Kim Jong-un made with Trump in June at the first one-on-one. Despite no tangible progress made or set timetable for disarmament, President Trump declared that North Korea no longer posed a nuclear threat shortly after that meeting in Singapore. Bolton said Washington would press ahead with another North Korea-U.S. summit shortly after the start of the new year, and the administration would keep sanctions against the regime until then. On Saturday, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis, speaking at the Reagan National Defense Forum in California, picked North Korea as an urgent issue when asked which country out of North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran posed the most serious threat to the U.S. Citing the unanimous UN Security Council resolutions on the regime, Mattis said, quote, "They're trying little ways to work around them, but the bottom line is, if they want out from underneath the UN Security Council resolution sanctions, they're going to have to make progress." Once again stressing the regime's commitment to giving up its nuclear programs. 차상미, 아리랑 뉴스.
Yet another court ruling in South Korea against Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for using Koreans in forced labor during World War II. The Gwangju High Court on Wednesday dismissed an appeal by Mitsubishi and upheld a lower court's ruling ordering the Japanese firm to pay compensation worth about $89,000 to $134,000 to each of the 4 victims or their surviving families. The court said Japan's colonization of South Korea in the early 20th century was illegal, and therefore it was also illegal for Mitsubishi to inhumanely force young girls to work at munition plants with no pay. Seoul Supreme Court in the past 2 months has handed down similar rulings in 3 other cases, so it's unclear if Mitsubishi will try to appeal again. Another victim of Japan's wartime sex slavery passed away. According to the House of Sharing a Residence for the Survivors of the Atrocity, 96-year-old Kim Sun-ok died this morning. Born in Pyeongyang in 1922, she worked as a housekeeper and a nanny. At age 18, Kim was told of a factory job offer, but instead she was forcibly taken to a military brothel in China to serve Japanese soldiers. After Korea was liberated, she settled in China but received South Korean citizenship with the help of the Gender Ministry. Historians say as many as 200,000 women were forced into sex slavery by Tokyo's military. Most of the victims were Koreans. With Kim's passing, there are only 26 survivors of that wartime crime left in Korea. A day after South Korean satellite was put into orbit by an American rocket, another successful launch, this time a geostationary weather satellite made using only Korean technology. According to government sources, the Cheollean-2A made contact with a ground station in Australia. For details, let's turn to our Kan Young-woo.
The Ariane 5 blasted off from the Guiana Space Center in French Guiana along the South American coast on Tuesday at around 5:37 p.m. local time, carrying a satellite for India and another for South Korea. The Cheollean-2A satellite, designed to enhance South Korea's weather monitoring system, successfully made initial contact with a ground station in Australia some 30 minutes after launch. In about 2 weeks, the satellite is expected to enter its intended geostationary orbit at 36,000 kilometers. Developed by the Korea Aerospace Research Institute, the satellite can provide images with 4 times higher resolution and deliver data 18 times faster than the first Cheollean launched in 2010. Its observation frequency is also increased 6-fold, collecting weather data around the Korean peninsula every 2 minutes.
The first Cheollean satellite in 2010 was developed by borrowing a European Airbus model, but the 2A was entirely built from our own technology. So South Korea is now capable of making both cutting-edge software and hardware for geostationary satellites.
The Cheollean-2A will run test operations for 6 months after reaching its intended orbit. After that, it will provide weather information for the next 10 years. Kan Young-woo, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, the nation's youth unemployment rate climbed sharply in recent years. To try and dissect the problem, the Bank of Korea released a research that compares similarities and differences between Seoul and Tokyo's youth jobless rate and suggests ways to address the issue. Kim Hye-sung provides a closer look.
Some of the factors pushing up youth unemployment in Korea are the country's rapidly aging population and the huge wage gap between big conglomerates and smaller companies. Using data from 30 OECD countries between 2000 and 2017, the Bank of Korea's report looks into youth unemployment across countries and in particular the similarities and differences between Korea and Japan. In 2000, the two countries had a similar youth jobless rate of around 6%, but as of 2017, South Korea's youth unemployment rate has soared to nearly 10%, while Japan's had fallen to 4%. The BOK said youth unemployment went up in both countries as their economies slowed down and their populations got older, factors that reduce market demand and therefore labor demand. Since 2011, Korea's GDP growth has tumbled to below 4%, far lower than the 9% growth seen in 2000. One difference in particular between Korea and Japan since that time has been their labor structures and the wage gap between large conglomerates and SMEs. The BOK said Korea's small and mid-sized companies pay workers a little over half the amount the conglomerates do, with the gap still widening. That means young people spend more time boosting their qualifications so they can work at the country's biggest firms, which results in a job skill mismatch and higher youth unemployment. On the other hand, wages at Japanese SMEs were more than 80% of the amount paid by large companies. In addition, it said the vocational training programs introduced by Japan starting in the early 2000s helped lower the job skill mismatch and created jobs of higher quality. To tackle Korea's record-high youth unemployment, the BOK recommended lowering the growing wage gap between big and small companies and introducing work training programs. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
International oil prices have been on a roller coaster ride recently. Dubai crude hit a 4-year high in October, but fell by more than 20% last month. Our Ko-Roon delves deeper to find out how this plunge could affect the South Korean economy.
Politics and economy are inseparable, and this time it's oil prices. In the first week of October, Dubai crude, South Korea's benchmark, hit its highest price in almost 4 years, trading at more than $80 a barrel. But it sharply dropped to below $60 a barrel by the last week of November. Two other global oil benchmarks, Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate crude, had their weakest month for more than 10 years in November, losing more than 20%. For the reason behind the sharp falls last month, analysts pointed to OPEC raising its production of oil and the United States waivers on Iran oil sanctions. Here in South Korea, the drop in international oil prices can be seen at local gas stations. Gasoline prices at this gas station in Seoul have dropped by around 20 cents per liter over the past month. The owner of this gas station says domestic factors also contributed to the fall.
Gasoline prices fell after the South Korean government slashed domestic transfer fuel taxes on November 6th. That helped cut gasoline prices by 11 cents a liter. The plunge in international oil prices also caused a fall.
A fall in oil prices is generally good news for South Korea, an oil importing country. It means lower production costs and stable consumer prices. But an economic expert suggests that the fall in oil prices could be a sign of problems further down the road.
The drop in oil prices can be one of the signals that the global economy is slowing down. Because the economy is getting worse, companies have cut their production, and there might have been less demand for crude oil. If the global economy slows down, it will affect Korea's exports as well.
Members of the OPEC will meet on Thursday in Vienna to decide on future strategies to stabilize the oil market. They're working toward a deal to reduce oil output by at least 1.3 million barrels per day. Ko-Roon, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. held a meeting in Washington for the follow-up measures on Seoul's exemption from America's sanctions on Iran. Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry said the two sides discussed matters related to trade transactions such as finance, shipping, and insurance. This comes after the nation requested Washington provide a clearer guidelines on technical issues, as there remains some uncertainties on whether particular transactions with Tehran should be subject to sanctions. South Korea and 7 other jurisdictions have been exempted from the Trump administration's fresh sanctions targeting Iran's oil, finance, and energy sectors after the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran early this year. The amount of online and mobile shopping transactions hit record highs in October, surpassing the $9 billion mark for the first time here in the nation, a trend driven mainly by the development of digital payment systems and more working days compared to the same period last year. Kim Jong-un breaks down the digits for us.
Data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday showed the amount of online and mobile shopping transactions increased by 36% on-year in October to register more than $9 billion. Purchases in food and beverages rose the most by nearly 50%, followed by cosmetics, winter apparel, electronics, and home appliances. The statistics agency attributed the surge of sales in cosmetics to the growing influx of Chinese tourists coming to Korea, as a great percentage of them bought goods online in Korean duty-free shops ahead of their visit. Mobile shopping transactions also jumped by nearly 44% on-year to nearly $5.6 billion. In particular, the food delivery sector saw the most transactions. An official from the statistics agency cited the ongoing rise of one-person households and the development of safer and more convenient digital and biometric payment systems as major reasons for the surge. Subsequently, the number of public holidays was also an important factor, as food delivery significantly decreased on major holidays like Chuseok or Korean Thanksgiving Day. Transactions of goods and services related to culture and leisure activities, meanwhile, saw a drop on-year in October. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Today, the Ministry of Environment hosted a debate to come up with effective measures to reduce gas and fine dust emissions from vehicles. Also, during the session, they turned the spotlight to this year's achievements in reducing fine dust emissions while discussing some changes planned for next year. Hong Yu has the highlights from that event.
Fine dust emissions have been reduced by more than 2 tons this year. The reduction is equivalent to more than 6% of the total fine dust emissions by diesel vehicles. It comes after the Environment Ministry began providing financial support to reduce fine dust emission. The ministry covers the cost of the early scrapping of old cars and of attaching pollution-reducing devices on old cars. This year, more than 130,000 old cars have gone through this process. And from next year, the Ministry of Environment is planning to get rid of more old diesel cars. They are considering increasing the subsidies given to owners of scrapped cars to help them buy new vehicles. Currently, a maximum subsidy of $1,480 is given to small businessmen and low-income earners who scrap their old diesel trucks and buy a 1-ton LPG truck. But the ministry is considering increasing the subsidy to more than $3,500. The specific changes of the subsidies will be announced on January. With such enhanced measures to reduce fine dust emissions produced by vehicles, the Environment Ministry aims to reduce 43% of fine dust emission in the road transport sector by 2022. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
South Korea's first cold wave warning of the season was issued today. In most regions, the mercury dipped below 0 degrees Celsius in the morning. The weather will get milder on Thursday, but the cold snap will affect the country again starting Friday. Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
On Wednesday morning, the whole country saw the mercury plunge. The first cold wave warning was issued overnight in most parts of the country due to a cold front approaching the peninsula from the northwest. Temperatures in Seoul fell to -5 degrees Celsius in the morning, while some regions in the east, including Cheolwon, tumbled to -10 degrees Celsius. The weather agency says the temperatures will become milder during the day on Thursday, as southwesterly winds will temporarily drive the cold front away. However, freezing winds from the northwest will affect the peninsula once again overnight and freeze the country from Friday. The cold snap is expected to last through the weekend and into the coming week.
Strong winds from the North Pole will bring even colder temperatures in the latter half of the week.
The cold wave is forecast to gradually weaken after early next week. Weather experts advise residents along the west coast to be ready for possible snowfall during the cold snap. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Park at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, it's even getting cold here in the studio. The cold weather has certainly settled in all of a sudden.
That's right. Now, it truly felt like winter today, but it will feel a bit warmer tomorrow with a warm southwesterly wind coming in. And at the same time, Beijing is looking ahead some frigid afternoon. But after tomorrow, it'll be much colder. Towards Friday morning falls to -9 degrees Celsius, and it'll stay below freezing all day. Until then, here are your morning lows across the whole country. Seoul drops down to -1 degree Celsius, while Daegu and Gyeongju have a warmer start to the day at 4 and 5 degrees respectively. Afternoon highs will mostly be between 7 and 12 degrees under cloudy skies and with a few possible passing flurries. Now, while it's cold and dry in Seoul, some regions will see some precipitation. The roads could quickly freeze over, so please stay safe. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we could pack into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. As always, thank you for watching.